Right, hello. This is going to be one of my commentary shorts. Short as in single subject matter, not necessarily in length. And this is something in relation to some work that I've been doing over a period of time, and that, but it's just condensed down to a few pieces of communication that's taken place recently between myself and government. Now, anybody that knows some of the stuff that I do will understand that I ask two very specific questions around the burden of proof for climate. There are two questions here, despite that it says one and one. Really, in the big scheme of things, and that's really not important. But I want two things from anybody that is looking towards implementing policies or doing anything whatsoever. They need to be able to provide me with the burden of proof to be able to justify anything they're doing. And it's particularly important around government, because the UK government is looking to be spending something like around about £3 trillion over the next 3 decades, all to solve a problem that they have the burden of proof to provide, to ensure that it is actually a problem that they would be solving in the first place, if you see what I mean. If you don't know if you're actually solving anything, why bother do it? And certainly why bother waste everybody's money? Why bankrupt everything? Because an awful lot of the crap that's going on at the moment has got a lot to do with what they're pushing through that had been based off of this climatard rubbish in the first place. So, in the first instance, what I'd done was the Treasury had made this absolutely idiotic proposal to charge road users on a per mile basis, and I'd seen a fair bit of communications going backwards and forwards from the Fair Fuel organisation, something like that. Anyway, basically like motorist groups. They were making various complaints to say, well, let's sign a petition for this, that, and the other. And I thought, well, rather than doing that, and I know that everybody keeps on having the same old arguments over and over and over and over again, what nobody seems to be doing is asking the government for the burden of proof. So I sent a Freedom of Information request out to the Treasury Department, and it is based on two basic burden of proof principles. The first one is the scientific method. The second one is to make sure that any models that they do are actually competent. This is not shit that I've just pulled out of my backside. This is the actual scientific method. These are the actual mathematical equations required in order to be able to produce a model, a competent model. So, like I said, this is not just guff in the way that they keep producing guff. This is what the burden of proof is. If they do not produce this information, they are not able to prove all of the other rubbish that they come out with around this climatard stuff. So, I asked them the question. This is the response that I got from the Treasury. Now, I made it very specific to them that in order for them to implement any policy whatsoever, they have to justify it. So they're quite upset the fact that I should dare ask them to defend their position. Yes, you do have to defend your position. You're servants, you're public servants, you're not the masters. You do have to defend what you're doing. I'll get to the response that I've made to these people a bit later on. But what we get here is the government accepts what you get from the IPCC. The IPCC is a political body of the United Nations. It is not a scientific body. So why are you taking instructions from a political body? That's bullshit. Then they keep on turning around and, oh, we've got the climate change, this, that, and the other. And then they got, right, it's recommended by the Climate Change Committee. Is it really? So, they don't know the answer. Simple as that. That's what you can gather from this. Press pause, read it if you want to. The basic tune of this is, we're taking instructions from a non-government, from a government that, a political body that has got nothing to do with making policies inside the UK. Nobody voted for these people, and they are political, so they have to be voted for, not by us. They then passed the buck to the Climate Change Committee. Right, so I asked the Climate Change Committee, exact same question. What do we get from them? Oh, it's an extensive body of work. Of course it is. It's such an extensive body of work that they've come back with, first and foremost, they've put down 4 questions that I didn't ask, and then they've put down 2 documents that they suggest as being some sort of proof, neither of which are. One of them is based on dust clouds, and it's done by some child basically out of Oxford. And then the other one is to do with oh crap, I should have written notes on this. It's to do with shit, did I put this? Oh yeah, here we go. I will remember that I actually put evidence of this stuff in there. So right, so you've got the Jones one, which is the simulated impacts of climate change on water use and yield of irrigated sugarcane in South Africa. What the hell is that? Attribution of extreme rainfall from Hurricane Harvey. Now, the Hurricane Harvey one, that is the guy that is from Oxford, whose great body of work is based around dust. How the hell is that a justification for them to be turning around and saying, here is the answer to your 2 questions requiring the burden of proof? And then they turn around and say, we're not the established body to undertake fundamental research. So once again, it's all this, oh, but it's the IPCC. It's the IPCC. And you want to send me these 2 references as your burden of proof. So my response to them results in this. First and foremost, I've made sure that they understood those were not my questions. The ones that they just decided to make up out of the blue were not the questions that I asked. I asked for the burden of proof. The links that they did send to me in their response didn't actually work, but then they kind of assume that you're too stupid to be able to figure out what those documents are. So I've let them know that I know exactly what those documents are, and I've given them links that do actually work. And I asked him if he's actually serious. This is, as I've put down in the bottom, this is going to be the government acting in bad faith. But what I did more importantly, like I say, feel free, press pause, have a look at the response that I've sent to this Committee on Climate Change. The longer response is the one that I'm going to read out. And this one went to the Treasury. And there are various bits and pieces to go along with this. So, I've put this to Rishi Sunak and everybody else. So, I'm attaching your response to what should have been 2 easily answered questions on account of your own stated overwhelming scientific literature, which is apparently so overwhelming that it's incapable of answering the simple burden of proof that should be required by any responsible government as a matter of basic due diligence. For clarity, I referred specifically to an article in the Daily Mail from November the 16th, whereby Rishi Sunak was the person announcing the National Road Pricing Scheme. So it's entirely reasonable for the person or department presenting the idea to understand what epistemology and evidence is in order to develop such ideas and thus be informed sufficiently to be able to justify the intention. Otherwise, how do you know you're solving anything? In this subject especially, anyone with any competence would know full well that settled science is a misnomer parroted only by the uneducated and would therefore require the burden of proof, particularly due to impact on the citizens that are supposed to be your priority. Government as a whole does need to justify its position on climate change, because whilst we are clearly in a political atmosphere right now whereby government has forgotten that you are public servants, not masters, and whereby due to the extent of the policies based on this question are so far-reaching, it is incumbent on the government to respond in considerably more competent fashion than because the UN and IPCC said so. I remind you that membership to the UN and its various bodies are not voted upon by citizens in the UK, and that the IPCC is a political body, not a scientific one, and any ideologies developed by this foreign body retirement home for failed socialists and members of the CCP, are not subject to the consent of the UK population. For those who do spend a few moments to check the ideological policies of these bodies and the government's apparent acceptance of their orders, can clearly determine such by your continued promotion of Agenda 2030. There's the evidence from their website. Or your acceptance of the Sustainable Development Goals. There's the stuff from their website. Neither of which have been subject to UK public scrutiny, nor any part of any manifesto for the public to vote upon, under clear understanding that the agenda is in fact not a domestic plan, and additionally the newfound policies for the government that have also not been voted upon, as they were not part of the manifesto in December of 2019, that are somewhat coincidentally named Build Back Greener. More suspiciously, Build Back Better. There's the stuff there. There's the links. So I'm actually providing links within the answer of evidence from their websites, which is rather reminiscent of the World Economic Forum's Great Reset plan, also titled Build Back Better. Let's move on. There we go. It does indeed require explanation and justification as to why the government is enacting policies on the British public that should in normal circumstances be part of combined UN, WEF, political body to stand for election on such manifesto, rather than its obvious backdoor entrance via what used to be known as the Conservative Party, an entirely undemocratic approach. I remember full well the convenient excuse of successive UK governments since 1973, whereby anything they wanted to avoid was always the EU's fault. But as that excuse has been removed, I'm afraid replacing this was because the UN and IPCC, and plainly WEF, said so, is not good enough, as the British public do not recognise these institutions as their governing body, which means it is incumbent on you to present any such foreign influence with complete transparency and indeed the due diligence to ask the kind of questions I have asked and that should form the most basic of competence measures. In terms of where you are now claiming to be receiving your orders without question, I can inform you that I have directly posed these very basic questions to the UN, the IPCC and WEF, including some of their most vocal supporters of this agenda, such as Michael Mann, and they have been completely incapable of answer. So the overwhelming scientific literature doesn't seem to include the burden of proof any competent person would require prior to enforcing crippling diktats on its citizens. As you have failed to perform this obvious task, then this willful ignorance of science and evidence-based policy is clearly travelling into ideological activism, i.e. reinventing capitalism, which does not have a happy record of history, due to association with such notorious names as Adolf Hitler, the National Socialism, Benito Mussolini and fascism, Mao Zedong and communism, and any number of other similar examples where the common link is a path to death and destruction. On this evidence basis of concern, it's absolutely critical that you not only justify yourself to me, but the entire nation, because you're clearly not operating on the basis of anything you can answer with any competence, and simply responding with a rather childlike "someone told me," which again is pure ideology, bordering on cultism, based on other groupings like Excrement Rebellion, who also pray to this same false idol. To give you some facts you are clearly ignoring, these bodies on which you are reliant are consistently wrong, leading to outright dishonest due to promotion of scenarios based on what is known as RCP 8.5, which no self-respecting actual scientist will consider remotely credible, and precisely why the evidence for the closure problem and all the confounders is a basic question of due diligence. To give you some facts, perhaps you can discuss these gross exaggerations with Prince Charles due to his participation in launching the Great Reset, whereby he's personally responsible for parroting these exaggerations as encapsulated in this article, him being wrong and then wrong and then wrong again. Whilst his end-of-the-world predictions have a habit of shifting, he is no different to any of the others that have consistently failed in this rhetoric for 60 years now, and no more reliable than the ever-shifting end-of-the-world dates from Jehovah's Witnesses' religious dogma, or, as already stated, other nefarious ideologies. Taking this further, and rather evidential of a policy based on the infamous quote, "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic and or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension the truth is the greatest enemy of the state." I can provide you with a list of total failures based on this rhetoric, i.e. not science. Let's see if you can figure out who that quote was from, by the way. You're basing these policies on not a comprehensive list of all failures, as I can add more if you wish, which can be found here, as in blah blah blah, yep, the 50 years have failed. This can then be followed up by the following Freudian slips from your source of this ideology. Ottmar Edenhofer, the lead author of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's fourth summary report, released in 2007, speaking in 2010, advised, "One has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. Instead, climate change policy is about how we redistribute the de facto world's wealth." So, yeah. Bullshit artist. The United Nations former climate chief Cristiano Figueres said that the true aim of the UN's 2014 Paris Climate Conference was to change the capitalist economic development model that has been reigning for at least 150 years since the Industrial Revolution. Nothing to do with climate change. Tim Wirth, the former US Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs, and the person most responsible for setting up the Kyoto Protocol, said, "We've got to ride the global warming issue. Even if the theory of global warming is wrong, we'll be doing the right thing in terms of economic policy and environmental policy." Liars. So, the fundamental dereliction of duty in your answer is best evidenced through the already known results of this ideology, whereby the huge burdens of cost and policies in the UK have factually cost lives, such as within those of energy policies, as evidenced by the climate change activist groups E3G and NEA of their report of 2018, Cold Homes and Excess Winter Deaths, a preventable public health epidemic that can no longer be tolerated. That's the numbers in this bit underneath the failed wrong again thing. Have a look at the numbers there, 167,000. This report observes that an average of 32,200 citizens die every year as a result of energy poverty. The subsequent season and the current season will be conveniently hidden beneath all deaths somehow behind COVID-19, but whereby, interestingly, the elderly population are the largest demographic of victims of energy poverty at 10%. As opposed to the 2% at worst for the same demographic from COVID-19. But somehow this lesser risk requires the destruction of the country's economy for all demographics, with a collective worst case risk scenario of 0.2%. But where, as per usual for activists, they also rather conveniently forget the poverty is caused by the policies they are pushing for, also without providing the burden of proof. So, you are now going to bring forward further damaging and harmful policies relating to the motorist because of the science, within which social mobility and work priorities are largely dependent, whereby, according to your own figures, 68% of the workforce use a car, as per the Transport Statistics Great Britain 2019 report. I'll include a link to this stuff in the description. And where the promotion of EVs will result by 2050 an extra per household cost of £2,825, as reported in the Cost of Decarbonising Cars of Andrew Montford. I'll add those links in as well. Let's move on to the next bit. Add to this the National Grid recently remembering previous warnings around capacity, even before your unresearched policies, as per this article of November the 4th. Them talking about blackouts happening again. So that was November the 4th of this year, 2020. The reminder for the National Grid can be evidenced from July 27th, 2015. There's that one from that article. So essentially they'd been saying that they've been warning about blackouts because of all of these policies, but then gone into this quiet period where they'd suddenly turn around and said, oh no, everything's fine, we can have more electric vehicles, we can do whatever we want, and that the capacity is absolutely fine. And now they've started to remember they've got a problem again. In other words, they've been lying as per usual. Right. These facts, as opposed to the science, then mean that energy will be more expensive with lower capacity and a higher cost of personal transport that may not be able to charge due to the former two problems. And you seem to think that you do not have to justify this to me, and more importantly, the whole country. As to the evidence you can gain from the Climate Change Committee, whilst I note no inclusion of any member capable of rebutting the rhetoric of the science, which would make the £5 million annual taxpayer cost burden of keeping this office running redundant, I do note the inclusion of a member from the University of East Anglia, because this has a solid reputation in this field, doesn't it? ClimateGate. I also know the government's long-held strategy now of pretending to have a debate whereby MPs who know nothing at all on this matter take a few moments to display their ignorance on any given subject in Parliament, then vote on the basis of the collective ignorance, whereby predetermined ideology alone determines the result. Or you put together the Citizens' Assembly. I'll include a link for that. That contains no other voice than that of the failed ideology, and pretend after you get past certain parts of that, I'll start to gibber, but never mind. That contains no other voice than that of the failed ideology, and pretend this constituted a discussion with the public. Neither of which holds any semblance of responsible governance, and rather replicates your response to my FOI, whereby you cannot answer because this proof does not exist and is thus not standing up to the scrutiny you wish to avoid purely for ideological purposes. A further significant problem of staggering hypocrisy, and I would suggest criminal action, is in the instance of the Citizens' Assembly you are evidently acting in collusion with, is an extremist ideology group, as per the report. Link in the description again. Which does rather beg the question as to why government is not being prosecuted for such collusion. This then raises additional considerations of the government being complicit with criminality and criminals, which in itself should again be part of due diligence beyond the pretend science, and bring us directly back to your stated source of the UN, that you have then failed to check the validity of their claims, and whilst this would be a very long list of evidence criminality, always void of repercussion, which raises further question as to the legitimacy of the UK membership and association of such criminals. What's her name? Oh, we move down to, yeah, well, there's corruption. And yeah, we move into this part. The prime example there is that Christine Lagarde being convicted. So the previous one was the fraud one. We only have to go back to December the 1st, 2020 to see allegations of fraud, whereby this is raised up again after the UN conveniently found itself not guilty of any misdeeds when it somehow defied all legal ramifications since by being allowed to investigate itself in the first place. This is important because you use your taxes, because you use our taxes to pay into the UN, and this includes the Global Environment Facility. Hence, I would question again why the government is not acting in the interests of the public by demanding full legal recourse. So that goes back to that one that I showed you previously. Could it be perhaps that in this incestuous organisation and others of its ilk, when a crime is committed and an individual found guilty, the epitome of one rule for thee is the inevitable result, as in the case of Christine Lagarde, who can apparently hand over 355 million to a friend, and her punishment is now to be the president of the European Central Bank. Maybe you prefer something more meaty, to ascertain the depths of criminality the UN will be involved with, to understand why any response of "because they said so" is not a justifiable and sound response, as you may recall the report on their employing 3,300 paedophiles and committing 60,000 rapes, whereby I can inform you that in the absence of your due diligence, I have confirmed this report directly from the source, i.e. Andrew MacLeod, because someone in the UK needs to know how to perform due diligence in the wake of the government's failure to do so. Should you wish to delve further into the government's failures to perform due diligence around these ideologies of the UN, especially in light of the kiddie fiddlers' association with these criminals, then I'm happy to begin this process by way of your flagrant disregard to this more disturbing aspect of their crimes and how you would have taken up their mantra of education, indoctrination, which includes teaching 5-year-olds about masturbation and the general sexualisation of children, because obviously paedophiles pushing this in schools doesn't raise a flag with you at all. Alternatively, or in conjunction with such due diligence, we could look at the authors of your Great Reset, which formed the backdrop of Rishi Sunak's ill-thought-out idea, and perhaps widen that out to the government's Build Back Better parroting of the same authors at the World Economic Forum. Though my own research is not yet complete, I can say that I have investigated 80 of the 685 member organisations and can state evidence of criminality within 100% of those investigated thus far. Naturally, this cannot all be stipulated in this response, but suffice to say the list of crimes includes the obvious acts of fraud, insider trading and other financial crimes, as one would expect from this gaggle of the corrupt. But I can say that it goes much further and enters into the realms of also paedophilia, rape, murder, torture and other assorted pleasantries. So I can certainly see the attraction from the government in wanting to pander to their ideology. Last page. I will give you one small sample as you are so concerned with the climate and environment, and offer you this morsel of air liquid. You can see that one at the top there. I'll draw your attention within this violation tracker to the violation that resulted in the pitiful fine of $5,000, whereby apparently killing someone has a limited recourse. As the government are clearly adopting the shared ideology of both the UN and the World Economic Forum, as evidenced in their strategic partnership, evidence of that, it could be justifiably asked of the government exactly what the hell is wrong with their collective tiny minds, kowtowing to this bunch of criminals, lunatics, that evidently could not care less about their own overwhelming scientific literature, and how this does not give further credence to the government absolutely providing the public with the burden of proof for rhetoric provided to you by the most blatant group of perennial liars in the world today. As things stand, the economic cost of 300 billion by 2030, as per Matt Ridley, it goes up to 3 trillion by the way, for green issues, and the lives that will be lost through the forced resulting poverty may well be considered optimal by persons of a eugenics mindset like Boris Johnson. There's a link to his article. Compounded by the gross incompetence of billions more debt and huge job losses from an equally scientifically retarded COVID-19 response that has raised such critical questions as whether a Scotch egg is a meal or not. A lowlight in another long stream of idiotic tyranny that has zero basis in actual science. And then further another 22 billion for innovation that the Treasury has signed off on on the basis of Build Back Better. Just a reminder that nobody voted for this. The resultant conclusion from these dramatic failures is that the government is in fact acting entirely against the interests of the country and its people, and considers itself above justification for these deeds, in much the same way as the UN and World Economic Forum cretins have become accustomed to. I suppose my question will then be, as I know you cannot provide the burden of proof for your climate-related policies, as it doesn't exist. When will the government make its announcement that it is now determined to model itself in the form of the 1930s National Socialist style of ideology, together with its paymasters at the UN and the World Economic Forum, so that the people of the nation can once again raise our Churchillian two fingers to you and politely inform you to all go forth and multiply? That is my response to the Treasury. Quite long. I've already had certain people that I put CC into that and that telling me that was a bit long. I don't care. It's an example of and evidence of, like I say, I always provide the evidence of exactly how we should be treating these people, where everything that they are doing is based on a lie. So, for those of you out there, and that's in the UK, that seem to think that we should be pandering to a climate emergency, well, I hate to break it to you, but there isn't one. And there is no scientific evidence of it. And I guarantee everybody that you ask, give me the burden of proof, show me that scientific method. The Treasury Department says, no, it's the Committee on Climate Change. They've got the answer. The Committee on Climate Change. No, we haven't got the answer. We have to give it to, there's these two papers from these two pillocks over here that are saying nothing to do with it. And then everybody says, no, but it's the IPCC, the political body, not the scientific body, because the IPCC is not scientific. There is a video that I will include in the description that is about 6.5 hours long, and it is the best of all of the footage and films and lectures of actual scientists telling you how much bullshit this all is. Anybody out there that is taking any of that nonsense seriously anymore is something wrong in your head. There is no science. And every single policy in every single country is based on a lie. Understand that. And then start asking questions and demanding, because they do have to justify themselves to you. Your government works for you, not the other way around. They have to justify it, and you need to demand the answers. So get writing. Cheers.